and other administration colleagues, and the word today is very negative. I mean, I think we're going to have to see what happens over the next 2 or 3 weeks with the current fiscal and budget negotiations that are underway, and see what kind of a mood everybody's in when they come back in mid to late January. But that aside, I think there are I think people and many members of Congress on either side the majority of them are exhausted and frustrated with the lack of ability to work together. Yes, there will always be factions that may say, no, we don't need to compromise, that compromise is weakness, but I think that is diminishing, and that Congress needs to produce something to help the American people, number one. I mean, year after year, our delay is not just frustrating, it's hurting our economy, and it's, I think, reaching a tipping point where, people are going to lose their jobs in the next election, if, in a more significant way, if we don't see some progress. So I think that, plus some more kind of very specific things that have changed with the last election in the Senate, are helpful in terms of getting back, at least on energy policy, to a place of bipartisanship, where traditionally that's been the approach of the U.S. Senate. We have new leadership in the Senate Energy Committee, Senator Ron Wyden, Senator Lisa Murkowski. They've been, really for the last year publicly pledging, no matter who was in leadership of the committee, their ranking and committee chair, that they would want to work together, and they have been working behind the scenes on their own energy bills. So I think that will be a platform for kind of a return to a practical approach on energy policy, and the question will be ultimately what the House of Representatives will do on energy policy. Their current leadership placements don't give you a lot of hope, but I think if the Senate moves forward and is able to show progress and pass legislation, the House will be put under pressure to respond in a more constructive way.
I'll go first because you'll just say I think we don't completely know. I mean, there's some interesting electoral trends that have emerged, and I mean the dominant narrative out of the federal election in particular, but also as played out in some of the states, is the rise of Hispanic voters in some of the key swing states. We've done polling, others have done polling, CAP has done polling. The Hispanic population is very dominantly in the environmental community's camp in terms of supporting environmental issues, very, very high percentage numbers. We've done focus groups with them, and we get those kind of answers. The other dynamic was, a very strong vote turnout from young populations, and similarly, when you ask young people, issues around environment are very high on their priority. They are generally in our camp, and so the question, I think, going forward will be how much do those kind of pieces begin to play out in terms of how the different players, the Republicans and the less good Democrats, view sort of their chances of political survival over time, and I think there's some dynamics that played out this election in terms of some of the candidates that give some hope that people that stand on the opposite side will lose their office.
Yeah, just a couple things. First, on public opinion trends, if you look at it through the 90s into the early part of the 2000s, there was some divergence among Republicans and Democrats on the reality of climate change and the need for leadership, but not a yawning chasm. That really widened starting in the middle part of the last decade, and I attribute it both to President Bush's explicit, sort of denial in his first term about the reality of climate change, plus, unfortunately, the side effect of Vice President Gore's leadership, an inconvenient truth, and his campaign was to some extent give Republicans a reason to be against it. If Vice President Gore's for it, it must be wrong. And then you had the rise of the Tea Party, which then came in spades and drove the Republicans away from taking action. And frankly, you had people like Mike Castle of Delaware, who voted for the Waxman-Markey bill in the House in 2009, lost his primary to run for the Senate in Delaware in 2010, partly because of that vote. And you may have heard the woman who defeated him, a Tea Party candidate, Christine I-am-not-a-witch O'Donnell, used climate change as one of her wedge issues in the Republican primary, a very narrow slice of Delaware. but very ideologically attuned to this. So the reality is, over the last 4 or 5 years, the Republican Party has been captured by the Tea Party, the Koch brothers, Competitive Enterprise Institute, the sort of jihadists on anti-climate reality. And most Republicans have been looking over their right shoulder at primary challenges, worrying that, like Dick Lugar, Mike Castle, Bob Inglis in South Carolina, they will be taken out in the Republican primaries if they acknowledge that climate is right, much less vote for anything to do something about it. What happened this last election, partly at the urging of some of us for a number of years, League of Conservation Voters and the other environmental groups, identified 5 Republicans who had taken explicit anti-climate stands in districts where Obama had come close or won in 2008 that had enough moderate voters where this could be made a liability. And they went after those 5. They called it the Flat Earth 5. They went after those 5 Republicans in a big way with advertising, door-to-door, materials, etc. 4 of those 5 Republicans lost their elections. And the one who won, Dan Benachek in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, won by only a few hundreds of votes. So if this campaign is expanded with perhaps backing from Mayor Bloomberg, who has done independent expenditure campaigns on gun control and campaign finance reform and now is deeply concerned and personally concerned after Sandy about climate change, if you could have the environmental groups and Mayor Bloomberg going after the denier dozen in 2014 in the midterm elections in the House, you could credibly say to Speaker Boehner and Majority Leader Cantor that they could lose control of the House over the climate issue. And all of a sudden Republicans need to start looking over their left shoulder towards the general election when they're thinking about, are they going to say what they really know is true on climate science or deny it? And I think this is a new trend combined with the demographics that Jake is talking about that could lead to an evolution of the Republican Party policy. There's not the organized resistance to the Tea Party there needs to be from the evangelical leaders, the business leaders, the retired generals and admirals and others that get it, that have credibility in the Republican space, but that's starting to coalesce and come together. There's now some active groups, including one led by Bob Inglis, that are saying climate is real, it's happening. Let's not debate the science, let's debate conservative versus liberal policy of how to deal with it. So Bob Inglis, for example, wants to do an economy-wide carbon tax, use that revenue to reduce income taxes or taxes on capital and labor, and also eliminate all subsidies, including for renewable energy, to energy, and just put a price on carbon as an externality and let the free market figure out what happens next. No government regulations, no EPA. That's a legitimate debate. And we're ready to have that debate. Obviously, we support fossil fuel elimination. We also support wind energy tax production credits. We also support EPA authority to regulate. But that's a fair debate. To say, what do we do about it? What's the best policy? It's not a fair debate to mislead people on the science, deny the reality of it, and try to misinform it and confuse the American people so as to avoid the debate over what to do about it. That's not a fair debate. And hopefully the Republican Party is going to get away from that in the next few years so we can have a real debate.